The sky was a deep, endless blue as Anna stepped out of the jeep, her boots crunching onto the dusty path that snaked its way into the mountains. She inhaled deeply, letting the crisp, pine-scented air fill her lungs. The scent of damp earth mingled with the distant hum of insects, creating an almost tangible silence. It was everything she had hoped for, remote, raw, untouched by the chaos of city life. Anna had come here for the story, of course, but there was something else, something unnamed that pulled her toward the Montanhas de Aurora. A desire to confront the shadows in her own mind, to prove that there was nothing in this world that could truly scare her. She surveyed her companions, her gaze lingering on each of them in turn. Carlos stood apart, his military stance rigid, eyes scanning the surroundings with a sharpness that suggested both confidence and a deeply ingrained paranoia. He seemed ready to spring at the slightest provocation, like a tightly wound coil. Anna wondered what had brought him here, what had made him sign up for this trek. Maybe he had his own ghosts to exorcise. Sophia, a middle-aged therapist with gentle eyes and a soothing demeanor, was trying to draw Lucas, the young trail enthusiast, into light conversation. Lucas couldn't stop grinning, his enthusiasm bursting through every word as he adjusted his gear with a mix of eagerness and inexperience. And then there was Marcos, their guide. He exuded a quiet authority, his rugged face etched with lines that spoke of years spent navigating the unforgiving wilderness. His movements were deliberate, efficient, like a man who knew these mountains as well as he knew himself, or perhaps even better. Yet Anna caught something in his eyes, a fleeting shadow of doubt, or perhaps fear. What could scare a man like Marcos? "We leave in 10 minutes, he announced, his voice low but commanding. "Stay close, follow my lead, and remember, these mountains have a way of tricking you if you don't pay attention." Anna nodded, adjusting the strap of her backpack. She had read about the treacherous trails, the dense forest that covered the slopes like a thick green blanket, the winding paths leading to heights where the air thinned and the wind howled. She was determined to capture the spirit of this place, to uncover the untold stories hidden in its shadows. As a journalist, she was known for her skepticism. Ghost stories and local legends never swayed her. She had come to prove that the so-called mystery of the Aurora Mountains was just that, a myth. The group set off, their footsteps crunching against the gravel, the only sound breaking the forest's hushed stillness. The trees grew taller, their canopies almost blocking out the sun. The deeper they went, the thicker the air seemed to become, charged with something Anna couldn't quite define. A feeling of anticipation, like the forest itself, was holding its breath. Anna glanced at Marcos, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand lingered near his map pocket as if seeking reassurance. What had he seen in these mountains to make him so wary? She wanted to ask, but chose instead to keep observing, her journalist's instincts telling her there was more to uncover. As the light began to fade and the path narrowed, Marcos paused, his face drawn and serious. "We'll camp here for the night," he decided, his voice cutting through the stillness. "The trail ahead is too dangerous in the dark." Anna's eyes flicked over the group. Carlos looked relieved. Sophia and Lucas exchanged nervous smiles. But Anna kept her gaze on Marcos. For a split second, she saw him glance back down the path they had just traveled, as if expecting something, or someone. The moment passed quickly, and he turned back to the group, his face a mask of calm determination. Yet Anna couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the mountains were hiding more than just shadows. The air grew colder as they began to set up camp, and a shiver ran down Anna's spine. This was it. The adventure she had been seeking. The story she would write to prove the world had nothing to fear from these mountains. But as darkness fell, she couldn't help but feel that they were not alone, that something was watching them from the depths of the forest, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Night descended over the camp like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a deeper chill that seemed to seep into their bones. The small fire crackled at the center of their circle, sending sparks dancing up into the canopy of trees that loomed overhead. Anna sat close to the flames, rubbing her hands together for warmth, her eyes flicking between the other campers. An unsettling tension settled over them, the shadows lengthening as the sounds of the forest grew louder. Branches creaking, leaves rustling as if something unseen was moving just out of sight. Marcos had been unusually quiet since they stopped, his typical air of confidence replaced by a pensiveness that Anna hadn't seen before. He sat slightly apart from the group, studying his map by the faint glow of a headlamp, his face obscured by shadows. Anna watched him closely, her earlier suspicions sharpening. That fleeting look in his eyes, that backward glance down the trail. Was it caution or something more? Carlos, sitting across from her, let out a low, uneasy chuckle. "Guess we're not the only ones who've heard the stories," he muttered, nodding toward Marcos. "See how jumpy he is? Doesn't exactly inspire confidence, does it?" Sophia, her expression soft but firm, shot Carlos a disapproving look. "Maybe he's just tired, Carlos. It's been a long day for all of us." Lucas, always eager to lighten the mood, grinned. "Well, if there really are ghosts or whatever out here, I say bring it on. At least then things would get interesting." Anna felt a smile tug at her lips, but it quickly faded as Marcos stood abruptly. His headlamp swung to the side, casting eerie, elongated shadows on the trees. "I'm going to check the perimeter," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, before disappearing into the darkness without another word. The group watched him go, the beam of his light bobbing and weaving until it was swallowed by the forest. Silence fell over the camp, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant mournful call of a night bird. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Anna kept her eyes on the path where Marcos had vanished, waiting for his return. But the longer she waited, the more a creeping dread began to settle in her stomach, a tight knot of fear that twisted tighter with every passing second. Finally, Carlos stood, his frown deepening. "It's been too long," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. "I'm going after him." Before anyone could protest, he grabbed a flashlight and started down the path. Anna hesitated, glancing at the others, then rose to follow. "I'm coming with you," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. Sophia and Lucas exchanged a worried look, but stayed by the fire, their expressions tense and uncertain. Carlos and Anna moved carefully through the thickening darkness, the beams of their flashlights cutting narrow paths through the dense undergrowth. The night seemed to press in around them, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves making Anna's pulse quicken. After a few minutes they stopped, realizing there was no sign of Marcos, no footprints, no sounds, not even the faint glow of his headlamp in the distance. Carlos shook his head, his voice barely more than a whisper. "This doesn't make sense. He wouldn't have gone far, not at night." Anna nodded, her mind racing. "Unless he found something. Or someone." They continued a few more cautious steps, softly calling his name, but there was no response. The forest seemed to pulse around them, alive with unseen movement. Anna's skin prickled with the unmistakable sensation of being watched. "Maybe we should go back," she suggested, feeling a rising wave of anxiety. Carlos hesitated, his jaw tight, then nodded. "Yeah, maybe you're right. We can regroup and figure out what to do." They turned back toward camp, but after a few moments the trees around them looked different, unfamiliar. Anna's chest tightened. "Wait, are we—" she began, but Carlos cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Shh! Did you hear that?" They stopped, straining their ears. At first there was only silence, and then a soft rustling sound like something moving quickly through the brush. It was faint, but growing closer. Carlos tightened his grip on the flashlight. "Marcos," he called out, his voice barely a whisper. No answer. The rustling stopped abruptly, and for a long moment there was nothing but their own rapid, shallow breathing. Then from somewhere deep in the forest they heard a voice, Marcos's voice, faint and distorted, calling for help. But the voice was wrong, stretched and echoing, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. "Carlos," Anna whispered, her pulse quickening. "We need to go back now." Carlos nodded, his face pale in the dim light. Yeah. Let's move." They hurried back to camp, the shadows seeming to close in around them, thick and heavy. When they finally reached the others, they were breathless, their eyes wide with fear. "He's gone," Carlos said, looking over at Sophia and Lucas. "Marcos is gone." And as Anna glanced back into the dark forest, she couldn't help but wonder if he had ever been there at all. Back at the camp, tension gripped the group like a vice. The fire had burned low, its embers casting long, flickering shadows on their faces. The forest around them seemed to press in closer, the darkness thick and almost palpable. Sophia wrapped her arms around herself, her eyes darting nervously between Carlos and Anna. Lucas sat cross-legged, nervously picking at the frayed edges of his jacket, his earlier bravado replaced by a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "We can't just sit here and do nothing," Carlos snapped, his voice tight with frustration. "If Marcos is lost out there, we need to find him." "But what if he's not lost?" Anna countered, her mind racing. "What if something happened to him, and going after him will only get us lost too?" Sophia swallowed hard, nodding. "Anna's right. We have to think this through. Rushing into the dark won't help anyone. We need a plan." Carlos's jaw clenched, muscles working beneath his skin. His gaze flickered between the faces of the group, his instinct to take charge battling against the fear gnawing at him. "Fine," he muttered. "But at first light, we start looking. Agreed?" "Agreed," Anna said firmly, though she wasn't sure if she believed her own words. The group settled in for the night, but sleep didn't come easily. Anna lay awake, staring up at the dark canopy above her, her thoughts spinning in endless circles. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent her heart pounding. She kept replaying the sound of Marcos's distorted voice, wondering what could have happened out there in the darkness. Her mind drifted to the stories she'd heard, of lost travelers and strange apparitions, of whispers that led people off the path, never to be seen again. She had always dismissed them as myths, but now, lying here in the cold, she felt a flicker of doubt. When the first light of dawn began to creep through the trees, the group wasted no time. They packed their things quickly, their movements tense and hurried, and prepared to move. Carlos took the lead with Anna close behind, Sophia and Lucas following, their faces set in anxious determination. They retraced their steps from the night before, moving cautiously through the thick brush, their senses heightened by fear. But soon things began to change. The trail that should have been familiar seemed different, overgrown, the trees thicker and closer together. It was as if the forest itself had shifted during the night. The landmarks that Marcos had pointed out were gone, replaced by unfamiliar terrain. The map that had seemed so reliable now felt useless, the paths it depicted no longer matching the reality around them. Anna stopped suddenly, kneeling down to inspect a set of footprints in the dirt. "These don't look like ours," she whispered, tracing the faint impressions with her fingers. The prints were small and narrow, unlike any of their own boots, almost as if they belonged to a child or something else entirely. Carlos frowned, scanning the trees around them. Maybe Marcos doubled back. I don't know, maybe he's playing some kind of trick on us. "Why would he do that?" Sophia asked, her voice trembling. "He wouldn't just disappear, would he?" Anna could sense the doubt creeping into everyone's minds. Nothing was making sense, and with each passing moment, the forest seemed to close in tighter around them, as if mocking their attempts to understand it. The air grew colder, and a strange mist began to gather around their feet, curling like tendrils, almost alive. Anna stood, feeling a chill run down her spine. "We keep moving," she said, trying to sound resolute. "We'll find him. We have to." But as they pressed on, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. The shadows seemed to shift and stretch, and every rustling branch felt like a whisper, a warning she couldn't quite hear. She felt something watching them, something unseen but present, waiting just beyond the edge of their vision. Then up ahead, a movement caught her eye, a flash of color between the trees. She halted, signaling the others to stop. "Did you see that?" she whispered. They all stared in the direction she pointed, straining their eyes. A shape, faint and flickering, seemed to move deeper into the woods. It was a person, or at least it looked like one, a silhouette slipping silently between the trees. "Marcos?" Lucas whispered, hope and fear mingling in his voice. Carlos narrowed his eyes, stepping forward. "Wait, don't move too fast, it might not be him." But the figure was gone, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. The mist grew thicker and the path seemed to twist and wind, leading them deeper into the unknown. Anna's heart pounded in her chest as they resumed their careful advance. The sense of being watched grew stronger, and she felt a cold sweat on the back of her neck. They were being led, she realized, not by Marcos, but by something else. Something that wanted them to keep moving deeper, to get lost in the maze of trees and shadows. She swallowed, fighting back the panic rising in her throat. "Stay close," she whispered to the others, "and keep your eyes open. This place, it's trying to trick us." And so, with unease settling deeper into their bones, they pressed on, stepping further into the unknown, not knowing if they were getting closer to Marcos or to something else entirely. Night fell swiftly, swallowing the last remnants of daylight and plunging the group into near-total darkness. They set up camp again, feeling the cold seep in more fiercely than before. The fire they managed to build was small and weak, its flickering flames barely holding back the encroaching shadows. Anna sat closer to the fire than the others, her eyes constantly scanning the perimeter, her ears tuned to every sound as the forest seemed to breathe around them. Sophia's hands shook as she attempted to prepare a simple meal, her face pale and drawn. "We need to stay calm," she muttered, mostly to herself. "We need to stay together, keep our heads." But her voice wavered, betraying the anxiety that gripped them all. Carlos, however, seemed to be losing his grip. He paced back and forth, his flashlight swinging wildly, casting grotesque shadows on the trees. "This doesn't make any sense," he snapped suddenly, stopping to glare at the others. "How does a grown man just vanish into thin air? And now we're seeing footprints, trails that go nowhere. We should have never come here." Lucas, sitting with his back to the fire and his knees pulled up to his chest, mumbled, "I heard a story once about these mountains. People go missing and sometimes they come back, but not the same. My uncle told me." Carlos whipped around, his eyes blazing. "Enough with the ghost stories. We need facts, not superstitions. We should have kept moving instead of wasting time here." Anna raised a hand, trying to keep the peace. "Carlos, calm down. We're all scared, but we need to think rationally. Whatever is happening, panicking won't help us." Carlos opened his mouth to argue, but a sudden noise silenced him. A low rustling sound came from the trees just beyond their camp. All eyes turned toward the darkness. The sound grew louder, closer, branches snapping, leaves crunching underfoot, something moving with purpose. "Did you hear that?" Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. She clutched Lucas's arm, her knuckles white. Anna held her breath, her heart hammering in her chest. She strained to see beyond the circle of light cast by their dying fire, but the darkness seemed almost solid, impenetrable. Then they heard it, a faint whisper carried on the wind. It was Marcos's voice again, calling out, "Help! Help me!" But this time the voice sounded closer, almost within reach, yet also wrong. It was distorted, echoing, like someone mimicking him with a distant hollow tone. Lucas's face went white, and Sophia covered her mouth with her hand. Carlos gripped his flashlight tightly, pointing it into the trees, his hands trembling. "Marcos?" he shouted, his voice louder than he intended. "Is that you?" Silence. The rustling stopped abruptly, as if whatever was out there had frozen in place. For a long moment there was nothing but the sound of their breathing, rapid and shallow. Anna's instinct screamed at her to run, to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The forest seemed to close in on them, the trees standing tall and ominous as if they had a mind of their own. Her skin prickled with fear, every nerve on edge. "We need to put out the fire," she whispered. "Whatever it is, it might be drawn to the light." Carlos turned to argue, but then he nodded reluctantly. "Fine. Do it. Quickly." As the flames died down, the camp was plunged into deeper darkness, and all they could do was sit in the cold, waiting, listening to the forest breathe around them, wondering if they were truly alone. The minutes ticked by like hours, each one dragging slower than the last. The darkness was almost suffocating, pressing in on them from all sides. Then, out of the silence, came a new sound. A low, steady hum that seemed to vibrate through the trees. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder, rising and falling in an unsettling rhythm, like a distant chant or a ritual drumbeat. "What is that?" Lucas murmured, his voice barely a whisper. Anna's mind raced. She had heard nothing like it before, a sound that felt ancient, like the very earth was speaking. "I don't know," she replied, her voice tight, "but I think it's coming closer." Carlos shifted uneasily. "We should keep moving. We can't just sit here." "No," Anna said firmly. "We stay put, we wait it out. If we move now, we might walk right into whatever's making that sound." Sophia nodded in agreement, her eyes wide and frightened. "Anna's right. We don't know what's out there. We stick together, and we wait for daylight." They huddled closer, drawing their jackets tighter around them, listening as the humming grew louder, echoing through the trees like a song from another world. Anna's heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She felt a strange pressure, as if the forest itself was closing in on them, testing their resolve. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was thick and oppressive, hanging in the air like a physical presence. Anna felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to stay calm. Whatever game the forest was playing, they would have to survive it, together. She glanced at her companions, seeing the fear in their eyes, and knew that this was only the beginning. The morning crept in slowly, a gray light seeping through the thick canopy overhead, casting long, distorted shadows on the forest floor. The group had slept little, their nerves frayed, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves jolting them awake throughout the night. Anna felt the weight of exhaustion behind her eyes, but she pushed it aside. They needed to keep moving. Carlos, looking more haggard and agitated than ever, took charge, insisting they follow the last known direction Marcos had taken. "We'll find him," he muttered repeatedly, almost like a mantra, as they moved through the underbrush. Anna wasn't so sure. Every step they took seemed to carry them deeper into the unknown, the forest growing denser, the air colder. The trees seemed to lean in toward them, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers. Hours passed with no sign of Marcos. The tension among the group grew thicker with each step. Then suddenly, Lucas stopped, his eyes wide with fear. "Look," he whispered, pointing to the ground. There, in the dirt, was a faint trail of footprints, small, uneven, leading off into a narrow, overgrown path that twisted away into the trees. Anna crouched down, studying them closely. They didn't look like any of their prints, nor did they match the heavy boots that Marcos had worn. These were different, lighter, almost delicate. "Maybe he circled back?" Sophia suggested, her voice hopeful but shaky. "No," Anna replied, shaking her head slowly. "These prints are old, and they're not his. I don't know whose they are, but they're not his." Carlos frowned, squinting down the path. "We should check it out anyway. Could be something there, a clue, anything." Reluctantly, they agreed, following the strange path deeper into the forest. The further they went, the thicker the trees became, their branches intertwining above them like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, unnaturally so, and the light seemed to dim, as if the sun itself was being swallowed by the shadows. Anna felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up, a deep unease settling in her gut. After what felt like an hour of navigating the twisting path, they stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center, half hidden by thick vines and foliage, was the mouth of a cave, a dark, gaping hole in the side of a rocky hill, its entrance partially obscured by a fallen tree. Lucas took a step back, his eyes wide. "No way. We're not going in there, are we?" Carlos, however, seemed almost drawn to it. He approached the cave's entrance cautiously, shining his flashlight inside. "If Marcos is anywhere," he muttered, "he might be in there. It's worth checking out." Anna hesitated, glancing at Sophia and Lucas, both of whom looked terrified. "We stick together," she said finally. "No one goes in alone." With a deep breath, they stepped into the cave, the darkness closing around them like a suffocating blanket. The air was damp and cold, the only light coming from their flashlights, which barely pierced the thick shadows. The walls were slick with moisture, covered in moss and strange markings, scratches that looked too deliberate to be random, too old to have been made by any of them. "Look," Sophia whispered, pointing toward a corner where something was partially buried under a pile of rocks. They moved closer, and as they did, Anna felt a cold shiver run down her spine. There, in the dim light, they could see a body, or what was left of one. The figure was hunched, almost mummified, the skin pulled tight over bones, dressed in familiar clothes. It's Marcos," Anna whispered, her voice barely a breath. The guide's face was frozen in an expression of terror, his hands clutched tightly around an old, crumpled map. The group stared in horror, taking in the details, the date on the map, barely legible in the dim light. It was decades old. The lines and trails marked on it were different from the ones they had been following. Carlos reached down with trembling hands, gently prying the map from Marcos's stiff fingers. "How?" he began, but no one had an answer. The silence in the cave was heavy, oppressive, the air charged like before a storm. Sophia backed away, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "We need to leave," she said, panic rising in her voice. This doesn't make any sense. He's been gone for days, not years." Lucas turned, his face pale. "But what does it mean? Was he lost in time? Did he?" Anna cut him off, her voice firm, trying to stay calm. "We don't know, okay? But we need to get out of here. This place, it's not right." Carlos, still clutching the map, nodded slowly, his face a mask of shock and confusion. Yeah, let's go," he muttered, his voice unsteady. "But this changes everything." As they turned to leave, the wind picked up, a low, eerie howl echoing through the cave. It sounded almost like a whisper, like a voice. Anna glanced back one last time at the lifeless form of Marcos, and for a moment she thought she saw his eyes move. Just a flicker, just enough to make her heart race. They hurried out of the cave, fear clawing at their throats, the questions multiplying with every step. And as they emerged back into the forest, Anna knew whatever was happening here was far beyond anything they could understand. The group stumbled out of the cave, breathless and disoriented. The forest seemed darker than before, the trees towering overhead like silent sentinels. Anna's mind raced, trying to make sense of what they had just seen. The image of Marcos's lifeless, mummified body was seared into her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes had moved, just for a second. Carlos clutched the ancient map tightly in his hands, his face set in a grim expression. "We need to figure out where this leads," he said, his voice tense. "Maybe this map shows a different route, a way out." Anna shot him a skeptical glance. "A way out? Do you really think that map will help us? It's decades old, Carlos. And if Marcos had it, why didn't he find his way back?" Carlos's jaw tightened, his grip on the map tightening further. "What other choice do we have, Anna? Keep wandering aimlessly until we end up like him." He gestured back toward the cave, his hand shaking slightly. Sophia's voice trembled as she spoke up. "We should stick together, stay calm. We can figure this out if we just—" But Carlos cut her off sharply. "Figure it out? We've been wandering for hours, and all we've found is a dead man who's been missing for God knows how long. We need to act, not sit around waiting for whatever's out there to come for us." Lucas, who had been quiet until now, nodded in agreement. "I don't want to end up like him. If that map has any clue, we should follow it." Anna sensed the panic rising in their voices, the tension fraying at the edges, threatening to unravel completely. "Wait," she said, raising her hands to calm them. "We need to stay rational. Rushing off without a plan will only—" Carlos's face twisted in frustration. "Rational? Look around, Anna. Nothing about this place is rational. You're free to stay here if you want, but I'm not waiting to die." Without another word, he turned and strode off into the trees, the old map clutched in his fist. Sophia called after him, but he didn't stop. Anna felt a surge of anger and fear. "Carlos, stop," she shouted, but he kept moving, his figure fading into the thick shadows. Lucas hesitated, glancing back at Anna and Sophia, his face conflicted. Maybe he's right," he muttered. "Maybe we should follow him." Sophia shook her head frantically. "No, we can't split up. We need to stay together, or we'll lose each other." But Anna knew it was already too late. Carlos was gone, swallowed by the forest, and Lucas's gaze kept darting between them and the path Carlos had taken. "Go after him," Anna said quietly, resigned. "If that's what you think is best." Lucas looked torn, but finally nodded and sprinted after Carlos. The sound of their footsteps quickly faded, leaving Anna and Sophia alone in the clearing. Anna felt a tight knot of dread in her stomach. Sophia turned to Anna, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do now?" Anna swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "We stay put. We wait. And we hope they come back. Together." But even as she said it, she knew how hollow her words sounded. The forest felt different now, darker, colder, as if it were tightening around them, sensing their fear. Minutes ticked by, turning into an hour. The sounds of the forest grew louder, a chorus of whispers, creaks, and faint crackles. And then suddenly a sharp, anguished cry pierced the air, coming from the direction Carlos had gone. Sophia's face went pale. That was Carlos, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What's happening, Ana? Ana felt her pulse quicken, her mind racing. She didn't know what to say, but deep down, she knew they were no longer searching for a way out. They were running from whatever had already found them. The forest seemed to hold its breath after the scream, the air thick and heavy around Ana and Sofia. They stood motionless, listening for any sound, any sign of Carlos or Lucas. But there was nothing, just the endless rustle of leaves and the distant, haunting call of an unseen bird. A cold sweat trickled down Ana's spine, and she clenched her fist, trying to keep her composure. We have to go find them," Sofia whispered, her voice quivering with fear. "We can't just leave them out there." Ana nodded, though every instinct screamed at her to stay put. The forest was playing tricks on them, warping time and space, making everything feel unreal. But she knew they couldn't abandon Carlos and Lucas. "Okay," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But we move slowly. We stay together. No one goes off alone, no matter what." They started forward, retracing the path Carlos and Lucas had taken, moving cautiously through the dense foliage. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches like skeletal arms reaching out to snag their clothes, their roots rising up like twisted hands to trip them. Every step felt like a battle against the forest itself. The air grew colder as they moved deeper, and a thick mist began to roll in, obscuring their view. Ana kept her hand tightly on Sofia's arm, refusing to let go, even as her heart pounded in her chest. A nagging voice whispered in her mind that they were heading straight into danger. Suddenly, they heard a faint rustling ahead, a soft rhythmic sound, like someone moving slowly through the undergrowth. "Carlos?" Ana called out, her voice low but urgent. "Lucas?" No answer. The rustling stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent again. Then they heard it, a faint, ragged breathing, followed by a low, guttural moan. Sofia's grip tightened on Ana's arm. "Ana, I'm scared," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "Stay close," Ana murmured, moving forward slowly, her flashlight cutting through the thickening mist. As they pushed through the brush, they saw a figure slumped against a tree. It was Carlos. He was sitting with his back to the trunk, his face pale and bloodied, his eyes half closed. The old map lay crumpled at his feet, dirt-stained and torn. Ana rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside him. "Carlos, what happened? Where's Lucas?" Carlos's eyes flickered open, his gaze unfocused. He went ahead," he muttered, his voice weak. I tried to stop him, but something is out there, Ana. Something watching us." Sofia knelt beside Ana, her hands hovering over Carlos's shoulder, unsure of what to do. "Carlos, you're hurt. We need to get you out of here," she said, her voice trembling. Carlos shook his head, his breath coming in short gasps. No, you don't understand. It doesn't want us to leave. It's playing with us. It wants us to..." His voice trailed off, his eyes closing as if he were slipping into unconsciousness. Ana's heart pounded. "Carlos, stay with us," she pleaded, shaking him gently. "What do you mean? What is it?" But he didn't answer. His head slumped forward, his breathing shallow. Sofia looked at Ana, her face stricken with fear. "Ana, we have to get him back to camp, but what about Lucas?" Ana clenched her teeth, trying to suppress the rising panic. "We don't have a choice. We need to get Carlos back and hope that Lucas finds his way. We can't stay out here much longer." Sofia nodded, though her eyes were full of doubt. Together they lifted Carlos, dragging him back toward the camp. But as they moved, Ana couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap, led by unseen hands closing in from all sides. The mist thickened, the forest seemed to shift and twist around them, and every step felt heavier, as if they were wading through water. The sounds of the forest grew louder, a low, almost imperceptible hum like something breathing just beyond their vision. Ana's skin prickled with fear, but she forced herself to stay focused. "Almost there," she whispered to Sofia, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. Just a little further, and then they heard it, a sharp snapping sound, like a branch breaking underfoot. They froze, their breath catching in their throats. A shadow moved in the mist, darting between the trees, quick and silent. Ana's grip tightened on Carlos, "Who's there?" she called out, her voice strained. "Lucas? Is that you?" No answer, just the rustling of leaves growing louder, circling around them. Anna's heart raced, and she felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Whatever was out there, it wasn't Lucas. "We need to move," Sophia whispered urgently. "Now." Anna nodded, and they quickened their pace, pulling Carlos along. Their footsteps hurried and uneven. The shadows seemed to dance in the mist, growing bolder, moving closer. Anna could feel their presence, like eyes watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And as they finally reached the clearing of their camp, the mist parted and a chilling silence fell over the forest. Anna felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up, her senses screaming that they were not alone. Something was here with them, something that knew every inch of this forest, something that thrived in its darkness. They laid Carlos down carefully, Anna's hands trembling. "We made it," she whispered, though she knew the worst was yet to come. For in the distance, the forest seemed to whisper, the wind carrying a faint, distorted voice that sounded disturbingly familiar. It was calling her name. Back at the camp, the fire they had left smoldering had gone out, leaving only cold embers. The mist was thicker now, curling around them like a living thing, dampening their clothes and chilling them to the bone. Anna and Sophia laid Carlos down carefully. His breathing was shallow and uneven. Anna's mind raced, desperately searching for a way out of this nightmare. Whatever had taken Marcos and Lucas was still out there, lurking, watching, waiting. Sophia crouched next to Carlos, her face etched with worry. "We can't stay here," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We need to do something, Anna. We need to get out." Anna nodded, her thoughts moving rapidly through the possibilities. "We can't go back the way we came. The path has changed and something's out there, but maybe if we go back to the cave, there might be another way out." Sophia's eyes widened in fear. "The cave? But Anna, that place, it felt wrong. We barely made it out once." "I know," Anna replied, her tone resolute. "But we don't have a choice. Marcos had that map for a reason. Maybe there's something we missed, something that can help us get out of here. It's a risk, but staying here is an even bigger one." Sophia hesitated, glancing down at Carlos. "Can he even make it?" Anna bit her lip, weighing their options. "We have to try. If we leave him, he won't survive the night. And if we wait here, whatever's out there will find us." Sophia nodded slowly, her face pale but determined. Okay, let's do it. But we need to move fast." They hoisted Carlos up between them, his weight dragging on their shoulders, and began the slow, arduous trek back toward the cave. Every step felt heavier than the last, the fog growing thicker, obscuring their view. The forest around them seemed to shift and whisper, the trees moving closer, closing in. Anna felt her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to focus. One step at a time. Keep moving. Don't think about what might be out there. As they neared the cave, the air grew colder still, a biting chill that cut through their clothes like ice. Anna felt a shiver run down her spine, but she pressed on. The entrance loomed before them, dark and foreboding, like the mouth of some great beast waiting to swallow them whole. She took a deep breath and glanced at Sophia. "Stay close," she whispered, "and whatever happens, don't let go of Carlos." They stepped into the cave, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air inside was damp and cold, their flashlights barely illuminating the narrow path ahead. The walls were slick with moisture, covered in strange symbols and scratches, like markings from some ancient language, too faded to understand. Anna felt her way along the walls, her hand brushing over the strange markings. "There must be something here," she murmured, her flashlight beam searching the shadows. Then her light caught something, a faint glint of metal embedded in the rock. Anna moved closer, wiping away the dust and dirt to reveal a small, rusted lever. She glanced back at Sophia, who was watching her with wide eyes. "What is it?" Sophia asked. Anna's fingers hovered over the lever. "I don't know," she replied, "but it might be our only chance." Without another word, she pulled the lever down. The ground beneath them shuddered, and a section of the cave wall began to creak open slowly, revealing a narrow hidden passage leading deeper into the mountain. Sophia gasped. "Anna, what have you done?" Anna turned to her, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "I've found us a way out. I hope." With Carlos barely conscious between them, they stepped into the dark, the new path stretching out before them like a promise or a trap. The passage was narrow, the air thick with dust, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed around them. The walls seemed to press in closer, almost as if they were alive, moving with every step they took. Carlos groaned softly, his head lolling back. Don't go further," he muttered weakly, his voice barely more than a whisper. Anna ignored the fear clawing at her insides. "We have to keep going," she said firmly. "We can't stay here." They moved deeper into the passage, their footsteps echoing against the stone walls. Anna felt her heartbeat quicken with every step, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The air grew colder and she could see her breath misting in front of her. The path twisted and turned, the walls narrowing, almost forcing them to crawl. Then, up ahead, Anna saw it. A faint light, barely a flicker, but enough to catch her eye. "Look," she whispered, pointing. "There's something up there." They moved faster now, pushing toward the light. As they neared, the light grew brighter, and they found themselves at the edge of a large chamber. The walls were lined with strange, glowing moss that pulsed softly, casting an eerie greenish hue across the room. In the center, there was a pool of still, dark water, perfectly round and unnaturally calm. Sophia stared at the pool, her eyes wide. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Anna shook her head, moving closer to the edge of the water. "I don't know," she said, her voice hushed. "But it feels old, like it's been here for centuries." Carlos stirred, his head lolling weakly. "We shouldn't be here," he muttered, his voice faint. "This place, it's not right." Anna glanced around, searching for any other exit, but there was none. The only way forward seemed to be across the water. She felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to focus. "We have to keep going," she said, more to herself than anyone else. She took a step toward the water, but as she did, the ground beneath her trembled, and a low rumbling sound filled the chamber. The water began to ripple, small waves lapping against the edges of the pool. Anna stopped, her breath catching in her throat. "What's happening?" Sophia cried, pulling Carlos back. Before Anna could respond, a dark figure began to rise from the center of the pool. It was shadowy, indistinct, its form constantly shifting and changing, but there was something almost human about it, something that sent a jolt of fear through Anna's core. The figure seemed to be made of the water itself, its eyes hollow and black, its mouth opening wide in a silent scream. Anna felt a pull, like a force drawing her toward it, and she had to fight to stay in place. "Don't look at it," she shouted. "Keep your eyes on me." Sophia turned away, shielding her face, but Carlos was staring at the figure, his eyes wide with terror. No, it's him," he muttered, his voice barely a breath. "It's Marcos." Anna grabbed Carlos's arm, yanking him back. "No, it's not real," she screamed, but her voice felt small in the vastness of the chamber. The figure moved closer, the water swirling around its form. Anna's mind raced. They had to do something, anything. She remembered the lever in the cave and felt a flash of inspiration. Maybe there was another way, another lever or mechanism hidden here. "Look for a way out," she shouted at Sophia, who was now crouched against the wall, her face buried in her hands. "There has to be something, a switch, a door." Sophia nodded, scrambling to her feet, frantically searching the chamber's walls. The figure reached the edge of the pool, its shape becoming more defined, more real. Anna felt a surge of panic, but then Sophia cried out. "Anna, over here!" she shouted, pointing to a small hidden panel on the far wall. Anna didn't hesitate. She lunged for the panel, slamming her hand against it. The ground shuddered beneath them, and the walls began to shift, grinding open to reveal a narrow path leading upward toward the faint light of dawn. "Go!" Anna yelled, pulling Carlos and Sophia toward the opening. "Run!" They raced through the new passage, the sound of the figure's movement growing louder behind them, a roar that filled the air with an unnatural chill. But Anna didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the light ahead, her heart pounding with each step, and then suddenly they were outside, stumbling into the cool, fresh air of the morning. The mist lifted, and the forest seemed to breathe again, its grip loosening. Anna collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, Sophia beside her, tears streaming down her face. They had made it. But at what cost? The hidden passage was narrow, the walls pressing in on them as they moved deeper into the mountain. The air was colder here, damp and heavy with a musty smell that made it hard to breathe. Anna felt the weight of the darkness around them, her flashlight barely piercing the thick shadows. The sound of their footsteps echoed against the rock, each step slow and cautious as they navigated the uneven ground. Carlos, barely conscious, stumbled between them, his breathing ragged. Sophia gripped his arm tightly, her eyes wide with fear. "Anna, how do we know this leads anywhere?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "We don't," Anna admitted, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "But we can't go back. Not now." They pressed on, the passage winding deeper and deeper. Anna could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. She kept her eyes focused ahead, determined to find a way out, to keep moving. But with every step, the sense of dread grew stronger. She could feel the forest behind them reaching, stretching, trying to pull them back into its grasp. And then, up ahead, she saw it. A faint light, barely a flicker, but enough to catch her eye. "Look," she whispered, pointing. "There's something up there." They moved faster now, pushing through the narrow tunnel toward the light. As they neared, the light grew brighter, and they found themselves at the edge of a large open chamber. The walls were lined with strange glowing moss that pulsed softly, casting an eerie greenish hue across the room. In the center, there was a pool of still, dark water, perfectly round and unnaturally calm. Sophia stared at the pool, her eyes wide. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Anna shook her head, moving closer to the edge of the water. "I don't know," she said, her voice hushed. "But it feels old, like it's been here for centuries." Carlos stirred, his head lolling back. "We shouldn't be here," he muttered weakly. "This place, it's not right." Anna glanced around, searching for any other exit, but there was none. The only way forward seemed to be across the water. She felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to focus. "We have to keep going," she said more to herself than anyone else. She took a step toward the water, but as she did, the ground beneath her trembled, and a low rumbling sound filled the chamber. The water began to ripple, small waves lapping against the edges of the pool. Anna stopped, her breath catching in her throat. "What's happening?" Sophia cried, pulling Carlos back. Before Anna could respond, a dark figure began to rise from the center of the pool. It was shadowy, indistinct, its form constantly shifting and changing, but there was something almost human about it. Something that sent a jolt of fear through Anna's core. The figure seemed to be made of the water itself, its eyes hollow and black, its mouth opening wide in a silent scream. Anna felt a pull, like a force drawing her toward it, and she had to fight to stay in place. "Don't look at it," she shouted. "Keep your eyes on me." Sophia turned away, shielding her face, but Carlos was staring at the figure, his eyes wide with terror. No, it's him," he muttered, his voice barely a breath. "It's Marcos." Anna grabbed Carlos's arm, yanking him back. "No, it's not real," she screamed, but her voice felt small in the vastness of the chamber. The figure moved closer, the water swirling around its form. Anna's mind raced. They had to do something, anything. She remembered the lever in the cave and felt a flash of inspiration. Maybe there was another way, another lever or mechanism hidden here. "Look for a way out," she shouted at Sophia, who was now crouched against the wall, her face buried in her hands. "There has to be something, a switch, a door?" Sophia nodded, scrambling to her feet, frantically searching the chamber's walls. The figure reached the edge of the pool, its shape becoming more defined, more real. Anna felt a surge of panic, but then Sophia cried out, "Anna, over here!" she shouted, pointing to a small hidden panel on the far wall. Anna didn't hesitate. She lunged for the panel, slamming her hand against it. The ground shuddered beneath them and the walls began to shift, grinding open to reveal a narrow path leading upward toward the faint light of dawn. "Go!" Anna yelled, pulling Carlos and Sophia toward the opening. "Run!" They raced through the new passage, the sound of the figure's movement growing louder behind them, a roar that filled the air with an unnatural chill. But Anna didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the light ahead, her heart pounding with each step. And then suddenly they were outside, stumbling into the cool, fresh air of the morning. The mist lifted, and the forest seemed to breathe again, its grip loosening. Anna collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, Sophia beside her, tears streaming down her face. They had made it, but at what cost? Anna sat up slowly, her chest heaving with effort. She could still feel the chill of the cave clinging to her skin, the terror from moments before still coursing through her veins. She turned to look at Carlos, who lay motionless on the ground, his eyes fluttering open. "Are we safe?" he asked weakly. Anna glanced around. The forest seemed calmer now, the mist lifting, the morning light filtering through the trees. But she wasn't convinced. "For now," she replied, her voice low. "But I don't think it's over." Sophia wiped her tears, taking a deep breath. "What do we do now, Anna? We can't stay here. We need help." Anna nodded, determination rising in her chest. "We need to get down the mountain. Find a village, a road, anything. We have to tell people what happened here, what we saw." Carlos groaned softly, trying to sit up. "And what if they don't believe us?" Anna met his gaze, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "Then we make them believe. We have to. For Marcos, for Lucas, for us." Sophia nodded, her expression firm. "Together then. We do this together." Anna got to her feet, helping Sophia and Carlos up. She glanced back at the dark entrance of the cave, feeling its cold gaze still fixed upon them. "Let's move, and this time we stay close." They began their descent, each step heavy with the weight of what they had seen, what they had survived. The forest seemed to whisper behind them, the wind carrying faint echoes of the voices they'd heard in the dark. And Anna knew that whatever lurked in the Montanhas de Aurora was still watching, waiting. The morning sun crept slowly over the horizon, its light filtering through the dense canopy, casting long golden shadows on the forest floor. Anna sat on the cold, damp ground, her breath still coming in ragged gasps. The air felt lighter here, less oppressive, as if the forest had finally released its hold on them. Sophia knelt beside her, tears still glistening on her cheeks, her hand gripping Carlos's arm as he lay unconscious but breathing steadily. They had made it out. Somehow, against all odds, they had escaped the grasp of the forest and the strange malevolent force within it. But as Anna looked back at the dark tree line, she felt no sense of victory. The price had been too high. Marcos was gone and Lucas was still missing. Sophia wiped her eyes, breaking the fragile silence. "What now, Anna? What do we do?" Anna stared out into the forest, her mind still reeling. "We go back and tell people what happened," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her bones. "People need to know, need to understand what's out there." Sophia nodded slowly, though fear still lingered in her eyes. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" Anna let out a small, bitter laugh. "Probably not, but we have to try, for Lucas, and for all the others who've disappeared." They sat there for a moment, the weight of their ordeal pressing down on them. Anna looked at Carlos, who had begun to stir, his eyes fluttering open. He gazed at her, confusion and fear flickering across his face. Did we make it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Anna nodded, forcing a smile. "We're out, Carlos. We made it." Carlos breathed deeply, his expression still wary. "But Lucas and Marcos, they're still in there." Anna's face tightened, her resolve hardening. "I know, but we're not giving up on them. We'll get help. We'll come back." Carlos's eyes darkened with doubt, but he nodded. "If we have to go back, then we need to be prepared. This place, it's not just a forest. It's something else." Anna agreed silently, her thoughts drifting back to the cave, to the strange shifting shadows and the voice that had called her name. Whatever the Montanhas de Aurora was, it was far more than just a place. It was something living, something old, something that thrived on fear. They helped Carlos to his feet, and the three of them began to walk down the mountain, each step heavy with the weight of their losses, each one determined not to let the forest claim any more of them. As they moved, the sunlight grew stronger, pushing back the shadows, but Anna knew it was only temporary. They reached a small village by midday, their clothes torn and muddy, their faces pale and haunted. The villagers stared at them with a mixture of concern and curiosity. But Anna did not stop to explain. She marched straight to the small local police station, her heart pounding with purpose. "We need to report a disappearance," she said to the officer on duty, her voice firm. "2 people lost in the Montanhas de Aurora, and we need a search party now." The officer raised an eyebrow, glancing between the 3 of them. "You know those mountains aren't safe," he said slowly. "People disappear there all the time. Are you sure they're lost and not just gone?" Anna met his gaze with fierce determination. "They're not gone. They're still out there, and we're not leaving until we find them." The officer nodded reluctantly, picking up his radio. "I'll see what we can do. But you're right about one thing. Those mountains aren't just mountains. People here know better than to go too deep." Anna felt a chill run down her spine, but nodded. Then it's time someone learned why. The sun began to set as the search party gathered, their flashlights and equipment gleaming in the fading light. Anna stood with Sofia and Carlos, watching as the group prepared to head back into the forest. She knew the odds were against them, that the chances of finding Marcos or Lucas were slim. But she also knew they had no choice. As they waited, an elderly villager approached them, her face lined with age and wisdom. "You came from the Montanhas de Aurora?" she asked, her voice soft but knowing. Anna nodded. "Yes, we were there. And we're going back." The old woman sighed, a sad smile on her lips. "Those mountains, they're cursed, you know. They've been claiming lives for as long as anyone can remember, but no one really knows why." Anna felt a shiver of fear but held her ground. "We're going to find out," she said quietly. "And we're going to bring our friends home." The old woman's eyes softened. "Be careful, child. The forest doesn't like to let go of what it takes, and it always takes something." Anna nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "We'll be careful," she promised, but inside, she knew that caution might not be enough. As they prepared to head back up the mountain, Anna took one last look at the Montanhas de Aurora, their peaks shrouded in mist, their shadows long and deep. She felt the forest watching, waiting, its secrets still buried deep within its shadows. But this time she was ready to face it, to confront whatever lay hidden in its depths. And far off in the distance, beyond the reach of their voices, the forest seemed to whisper, its ancient voice carried on the wind, a warning or perhaps a promise. Anna turned away, steeling herself for what lay ahead. Whatever the Montanhas de Aurora were hiding, she would uncover it. She owed it to the ones they had lost, and to the ones they still had to find. And so, with determination burning in her chest, she stepped forward, ready to face the darkness once more.